Most teams have adopted Salesforce real-time capabilities but are still operating in batch mode. There is a big difference between platform readiness and execution readiness. Platform readiness means that technology is in place. You have the right tech stack which you can focus on, while execution readiness means
so many teams coming out of a migration, they usually feel like the hard part is over. But then 6 months later, the same performance gaps are still there.
agents act on live signals automatically. They don't pause when the logic is stale. They don't flag when a segment is conflicting or not working.
Execution debt is the complexity that accumulates in your... The real readiness test isn't, is this platform live? It's more like...
Most teams we work with who are on Salesforce, be it Marketing Cloud engagement or Marketing Cloud account engagement, we have seen that they have unified their customer data, they have built out their journey architecture, and some of them have already completed the full platform migration, right? However, they still come back to us asking the same question again and again. Why isn't our performance improving? Now, that's not a problem related to Salesforce, right? It's not a Salesforce problem. It's an operational gap, right, in terms of the execution. And with Agentforce in picture now, teams haven't addressed these are finding it significantly harder to close that gap, right? So in this video, we are covering exactly where execution debt builds up, why most teams aren't as ready as they think, and what to fix so you can scale. Hi there, I'm Chintan Doshi. I head CRM and Lifecycle marketing team at Mavlers. Joining me today is a familiar face, our growth strategy partner, Matt Kelly. Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Hey, Chintan. How you doing? I'm glad we're talking about this today because this is a conversation that I'm having constantly. I'm talking with teams that are investing in next generation tools. They're really excited about things that are available for them today, but their journey logic, segmentation, and activation workflows just aren't really built to support them. They haven't really fixed that yet. This is not a solution that's going to help them. So I think one of the things that we'll get into today is helping them fix that foundation so they can get more out of these next platforms.
Yep, perfect. Then, Matt, let's start from a point here where most of the leaders I speak with don't even realize this is happening until it's too late. Where does execution debt actually come from, and what does it look like when it's already embedded into the system?
Chintan, I like to start with CRM. Whenever CRM leaders hear debt, they immediately think of developer tickets or legacy code or configurations that they've spent a lot of time and invested a lot of money in creating, IT backlogs, if you will. But that's not what I'm talking about. Execution debt is the complexity that accumulates in your journey logic, segmentation, and activation workflows. This is the complexity that builds up gradually and silently. I think that people don't even really see it happening until they try to make some major change and they have to go back and unravel all of these things that they've built. No one really catches it until you start working against them. And most teams are carrying around far more than they even realize.
Execution debt, as you mentioned, is definitely complex and it gets accumulated. Matt, would it be possible for you to give us some examples of what that actually looks like?
Yeah, Chintan, I'll give it a shot. So the first one that I think people need to look at is execution debt in their journey logic. So let's say a team builds a post-purchase journey, and there's one entry trigger, one confirmed order, and then one path that you want to take them on. So everything is clean, right? Now, 6 months in, imagine you launch a new product category and it needs a different message. So now the journey, it gets forked at the product that they purchased, right? So typically the email team would run a promo that overlaps the journey sends. So there's an exclusion filter that goes in. Maybe compliance then flags that as a consent issue in one region, but not another. And then there's this condition layer that gets added. And because compliance matters, because opt-ins and consent and all of the rules that govern unsubscribe matter, someone notices that the customer that's receiving this journey just has already bought the upsell all of a sudden, now that you had to stall and pause for all of these things to be considered. They're still receiving it, and then they get a promo for it, for them to go back and buy it again. It's a broken experience that is really caused by execution debt. You just couldn't move fast enough to change that experience with technology. 2 years later, that journey that we're talking about here has 40 different nodes, right? It's all of a sudden, because you've just built on top of something and built on top of it and built on top of it, it's a really complex journey that is a really good example of the debt that we're talking about. It's hard to unravel, and you don't know what else to do about it. So the thing is, there's no single decision that was wrong in creating that. All of those different additions and customizations were for a good reason. But each fix was a legitimate response to a real problem. And what happened is that particular moment that we're trying to influence, it's hard to catch at that point. You're not going to be able to see these things happen and then take action on them because this whole big thing was built. That's why it matters right now to specifically think about Salesforce as, when you look at these newer marketing products, including Marketing Cloud Next specifically, they're leaning into flow-based orchestration rather than classic journey builder journeys, right? So if Marketing Cloud Next is on your roadmap, undocumented journeys, not really having them in a place where you can look at them and see how they're built, that's really becoming a big problem for people. And adding to the workload of going back and now building all the documentation you need to migrate to a new system, just people don't want to incur the cost of going back and doing that. They just copy it over and they hope for the best. I think somebody needs to be able to explain exactly what each journey does, why it exists, what data it depends on, and what outcomes that you're hoping that it can drive for you. Otherwise, you are either spending weeks reverse engineering your own automation and getting lost, or you're dragging the same complexity into the next platform. So the next category is execution debt and segmentation. Let's say a campaign performs well. So for the next one, the team duplicates it and tweaks just a few things. Usually, this tends to be repeated over and over again. Now the thing is, if it's left unchecked, as time goes on, you'll end up with dozens of audience definitions that overlap, right? These segments will start to sort of bleed and start to look very similar to one another. And when you go to apply suppression logic on making sure that the wrong message doesn't go to the wrong person at the wrong time, this segmentation debt reflects really badly on your ability to execute a decision like that. So because nobody has a centralized view of how those segments relate to each other, customers end up receiving conflicting communications and being excluded from journeys that they should actually be a part of. All right, so I'm going to keep going here. So the third category that I want to talk about is execution dependency debt. What I mean by that is what will happen is that somebody needs a data set that isn't automatically flowing through Salesforce. They set up a manual export, if you will. Let's say this export runs every Monday and it takes 20 minutes. Now, everything seems fine in that moment. The problem is that 6 months later, 3 triggered journeys and 2 suppression lists depend on that Monday export. They're built on top of it. Nobody documented it, and if the person running it has moved on, then that manual process now becomes load-bearing infrastructure. Okay, remember that, load-bearing infrastructure. This happens all the time. It's completely invisible inside your platform. I'm sure you've seen it 100 times, Chintan.
Yep. And thanks, Matt, for giving that detailed walkthrough of execution data across journey logic, segmentation, and process dependency. All 3 are critical. So let's move forward and discuss on what should teams actually be looking out for to know if this is happening to them, like constantly, and what would be your suggestions?
Yeah, so I recommend tracking 3 signals. The first one, if you have active journeys that haven't been formally audited in over 12 months, I'd have them audited, right? And by audited, I mean somebody actually reviews them, the entry criteria, the logic branches, and the suppression rules. They document those, they make sure that they're visible and shareable, but they need to confirm that they still reflect what the business actually needs today. If that hasn't happened, you likely don't know what those journeys are doing anymore. The second thing that I want to make sure that I flag as signal is you need to check whether your program has manual processes that campaigns or journeys depend on. And ask yourself honestly, if one of those processes stopped tomorrow, would I know straight away, or would it take me a while to figure it out? If the answer is no, that's a reliability risk. that your platform has no visibility into. The third thing that I want to make sure that people think about is if a new team member joins tomorrow, could they understand your segmentation architecture on their own? Or would they need a senior person to walk them through it and train them on everything that's happened? If it's that complex, the knowledge is concentrated in a way that's risky. It means your complexity has outpaced your documentation and it's not transferable to a new team.
Yep. So you are definitely right, and because if any of the situations are true, it's a clear sign that execution debt is already affecting your ability to move forward. The question isn't whether you will be able to address it or not. It's whether you do it on your own terms or wait until something breaks down and forces you to rebuild everything from scratch.
Yeah, exactly. I'd say, Chintan, so many teams that we work with, when they're coming out of a migration, they usually feel like the hard part is over. But then 6 months later, the same performance gaps are still there. And from your POV, I'm curious what actually is going into activation side.
So to be honest, Matt, I really want to be careful here because the last thing I want to do is to say that people's investment in Salesforce was the wrong call, right? That should not be the case because platform consolidation matters, data cloud matters, getting your customer data into a unified profile definitely matters, and that's the basic groundwork. But there is a big difference between platform readiness and execution readiness. Platform readiness is majorly focused on it means that technology is in place. You have the right tech stack, which you can focus on. The data is flowing, the integrations are working and are live, and that licenses are active for you to access the platform. While execution readiness means that your team, your processes, and your data quality are all actually capable of activating the journeys against the platform capability that is already there in the platform. Most teams I've observed achieved platform readiness and assume it automatically means they are execution ready, but that's not the real case.
I've definitely seen it. Most of the programs that I've seen, that assumption is where things start to go wrong. And I think in this conversation, Chintan, I'd love to talk about why that gap matters so much right now. What would you say to that?
Because Agentforce has raises the stake in the way it personalizes things for messaging,
Yeah.
right? The way it takes over the previous capability of upgrading things. Agents act on live signals automatically. They don't pause when the logic is stale. They don't flag when a segment is conflicting or not working. They execute at scale on whatever foundation has been given to them. So if that foundation has gaps, those gaps don't just perform or affect the performance anymore. That's get amplified. And here is what I see consistently. Teams complete a migration, right? Moving to a MC or MC next. The project closes and stakeholders are satisfied that, okay, they have done the migration. But the execution layer that moved into a new environment is the same way they had before with same gaps. So even though the platform has changed to Salesforce, the underlying problem, which was there in the execution, it still remains the same. So they don't focus on optimizing those gaps. And this is what exactly what makes Agentforce conversation so important right now. Salesforce is positioning agents to do things which are like autonomous retargeting, span reallocation, and real-time journey optimization. Now that's genuinely powerful. Like you don't need a human to focus on budget allocation, real-time optimization of your journeys. But an agent acting on a stale journey, a conflicting segment, or a signal that's hypothetically only firing 60% of the time isn't going to optimize your program or give you the result. It's going to amplify whatever was already broken.
And if you could talk just a little bit more about which of those gaps that you see showing up so often in these migration conversations.
Yep, definitely, Matt. And in my opinion, there are majorly three gaps consistently which we have seen into migration, which we are managing for the customers. The first and the foremost is data and signal quality. If your browse events are only firing 60% of the time, every trigger journey and every downstream decisions is working with incomplete information. And the sad part is that your customers experience that gap before your analytics catches them, right? In terms of the messaging they receive. Retail marketers, especially the signal are there like browse behavior, purchase intent, engagement patterns, etc. But most of them never make it into action because the capture rate isn't what teams assume it is. and you simply cannot build real-time decisioning and data that isn't actually real-time. The second gap majorly is at the process maturity. So most teams have adopted Salesforce real-time capabilities, but are still operating in batch mode, meaning campaigns are built across around dates and promotional moments rather than customer behavior, which we discussed in our previous webinars and videos. So now it's the time to focus on actually triggering messages based on the customer behavior rather than doing that batch and promotional driven moments. So you see Salesforce has the capability to execute triggers, but the team is still planning in weekly crisis. That mismatches or shows up directly into your performance numbers, and most teams never connect the two. The third one is more of a organizational alignment, like in terms of how things are working across the teams, be it data, strategy, and execution. All of them are running in silos as separate work streams. Nobody has a shared end-to-end view of what the customer is actually experiencing across all active journeys and campaigns and across different messaging channel. And that's exactly where like activation gaps live in the space between what Salesforce can do and how the teams around it actually operates.
I think it's hard for teams to know exactly where they stand on all this.
When I go on discovery calls and try to connect with our prospects or go on a QBR call with our existing customers, I usually tell them, don't guess where you stand right now, right? Test it, right? Rather than pressure test it. So it's always being better if you are like cautious about how things are moving, taking those precautionary steps, right? Rather than the pressure of identifying those challenges or signals which you are receiving from your customers, right? Building up those pressure for you. So remember those three signals we talked about earlier. Here are the questions that usually expose them very quickly. The first one is of your active journeys. How many of your journeys have been reviewed against your current business intent in the last 12 months or 18 months? Like how many times you have reviewed it? Not just that is it live, but does it still reflect on how your business actually runs and operates today? Because in most programs, that questions alone will bring up that all the journeys that are still running on logic, that nobody is still validating it in yours. So the second one is more on how much of your current setup depends on one person, like more of a person dependent challenge, right? Like who simply knows how it works. There is no clear documentation or handoff plan, no personal visibility in terms of how it is operationally working. You won't know that something is broken until a journey misfires or a suppression list goes stale. And the last one is the third question is majorly around if Agentforce were making decisions based on your current data and journey logic tomorrow, would you be confident in the outcome or the results you are going to get? Because that question cuts through everything. Then things aren't hypothetical or operational gaps anymore. They directly impact autonomous decision making, which Agentforce takes on its own. So these are the three questions which will tell you or help you about your execution readiness and your Agentforce readiness.
To summarize, it sounds like you're saying the real like readiness test isn't is this platform live? It's more like would you trust it to run autonomously right now if you handed it over to an agent?
Exactly what I was trying to portray. And if the honest answer is no, that's where the work needs to start. Matt, I want to talk about what teams can actually do about fixing the issues, because everyone would be waiting for this strategy, right? Let's talk about what all of this theory actually looks like in practice when, let's say, brands and people wants to implement into their platform.
Yeah, Chintan, of course I can. But before we get into the fixes, I want to address something for anyone who's about to take this conversation to their leadership. Because how you frame this internally will determine whether it actually gets resourced or not. When you bring execution debt to leadership, a natural reaction is, so you mean we built this wrong, right? That's what they might ask you. And that framing kills the conversation before it even starts, every single time. The truth is, every CRM program that's been running for years and delivering real business impact will accumulate this kind of debt. It's really common, right? So It's natural. It's a natural byproduct of a program that has consistently responded to real business needs over time. It's just what happens. The team doing this cleanup, they're actually the ones who most times been operating it long enough to have something worth cleaning up. So that's a win, right? I mean, it's kind of a positive thing. So when you bring this to your leadership, frame it as this is a maturity milestone. This is a good sign that we've matured to a point where we have to fix this stuff. Not like it's some remediation project or some major problem needs fixed and we have to spend time and money to fix it. You're not really fixing something that's broken. You're building the foundation that your next phase of growth actually needs.
Yep, that's true, and exactly what you mentioned, and that framing matters more than people realize, right? Because it determines whether this work gets properly resourced or quietly deprioritized. So, Matt, take it away. Let's talk about the core part. What does the right approach to fixing it actually look like?
Yeah, Chintan. So let's talk about the fixes. The sequence matters as much as the work itself, right? So most teams do everything backward. They invest in Salesforce first, and then they try to clean up complexity as they start that migration and all the new work is already sort of up and running, right? That's how the timeline can slip. That's how budgets can expand, and teams end up a year later feeling like they're more constrained than ever before. So here's the order that I recommend instead. The first priority is simplify your journey logic. The instinct is always to keep building, but smart CRM teams stop and audit first. So for every active journey, I would ask these three questions. Number one, is it still driving the outcome that it was built for? Number two, does anyone actually understand the full logic behind this journey? And the last is, has the business changed enough since this journey was created that this is no longer relevant? If those answers aren't clear, retire it or rebuild it clean when you do the migration. The same goes for segmentation. I'd say the best teams build reusable logic once and scale it across campaigns. That's where I see this really working the best. That reduces overhead and restores visibility into what is actually working. The second fix that I think we should talk about is validate your signals before building something new. So most teams treat signal quality like a data issue, but it's actually a revenue issue. If a behavioral trigger only fires 60% of the time, then 40% of the customers who should enter that journey never will. The journey looks weak, teams lose confidence in trigger-based marketing, and they revert back to batch and blast mentality. Meanwhile, the actual issue, the signal gap, it never gets identified because nobody was even looking for it in the first place. And with Agentforce, the risk gets bigger. A degraded signal doesn't slow the agent down. It gives the agent something to act on confidently and at scale, but in the wrong direction. So every 30 to 60 days, document capture rates for the most important signals. Know exactly what breaks if those signals degrade. The third one that I'd say we need to talk about is, the last priority here, create one shared activation view. Most activation gaps are not technology problems. They're coordination problems. Data sees one layer, strategy sees another, and when it comes time for execution, they're looking at something completely different. Nobody sees the entire customer experience end to end. The answer is not adding more tools, it's creating one shared view. That view will show you what you're activating, what signals you depend on, and what the customer is actually experiencing. Visibility closes coordination gaps. More investment doesn't.
Yep. Rightly said. And so as I understand it, there's a clear sequence. Clean the foundation first, validate what's feeding it, right? Like in what's coming under the system. Then align your team around a shared view of what it's actually doing. So fix the system and then scale it.
Exactly. Execution debt accumulates quietly in journey logic that nobody reviews, in segments that nobody maps, in manual processes that nobody documents. And it stays invisible right up until the moment that you try to do something new. So if you take one thing from today's conversation, it's that, you don't need to lead with new capability. Start with an audit. Know what you're actually running, know whether your signals are reliable, and make sure your teams are looking at the same picture before you scale anything or make some major transition.
You're definitely right, Matt. And thanks to everyone for watching this video. And if you're going through these challenges, feel free to reach out to Matt. There'll be a link in the description that you can use to get in touch with us. And also remember to subscribe because we have a lot more videos coming up on CRM. And thank you,
Yeah.
Matt, for sharing those lovely insights. I'm sure it would be helpful to all the lifecycle marketing and CRM leaders who are either on Salesforce right now or are planning to move to Salesforce Marketing Cloud next.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chintan. For those watching, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.